From Rwanda to France, Mr. François Nkulikiyimfura, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for participating in this hearing. Since 9 a.m. this morning, we have been able to exchange views with the governor of South Kivu province, who has provided a number of details. I propose quite quickly, if you agree, to discuss the current situation, both the military situation and also the humanitarian and health situation, because the tragedies continue with many deaths every day. Humanitarian aid today is insufficient or even interrupted in a number of cities in the north and south. Today, military, but also humanitarian health situation, because the tragedies continue with many deaths every day. Humanitarian aid today, which is insufficient or even interrupted in a number of cities in North and South Kivu. And then there is the question that arises today about the situation. How do you, as the representative of the Rwandan government, see the resolution of this situation, which has been known and documented for some 30 years, now years, with new developments since 2021, and particularly since the breakthrough of the M23 and the capture of Goma and Bukavu, and the breakthroughs today that continue to take place on DRC soil? What we would also like to have as an element is the relationship, the link that reads Rwanda with the M23. There are many things appearing in the press documents, UN resolutions. UN also mentioned very specific close links between Rwanda and the M23. What is your position on this, and also on Resolution 2773 of 21st February 2025, which expressly calls on forces outside the DRC to withdraw and to immediate ceasefire? What is your position on this resolution as well? That's it for starters. I'll give you the floor and then I'll explain the rules. Each political group has appointed a speaker who will ask a question for 2 minutes. 30, you will have the opportunity to respond to each intervention each time, like a dialogue, and then a third sequence. Each member of parliament individually can take the floor and ask you questions. That's all for about of 1 minute, 1 hour, 40 minutes, 1 hour, 45 minutes. If we manage to keep to this timing, Mr. Ambassador, thank you again for your presence. And I would also like to greet the representatives of your embassy who are with you. And I will give you the floor for about 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, honorable members. I would like to thank you for your invitation and for the opportunity offered to Rwanda through my voice to present to you our country's point of view on this conflict, which is devastating our sub-region. I would like to thank you sincerely for the, excuse me, I believe there is a problem of, there are some technical issues. You have a number of illustrations. That's it too, or yes, no, it's, they are connected. Yes, very well. There we go. Yes, first of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation and the opportunity to share with you, dear parliamentarians, Rwanda's position on the current conflict in the east of the DRC, a conflict that has its roots in the complex history of our region and which requires a careful reading without shortcuts and without risky prejudices. Since February 2022, a war has been raging at the gates of the European Union, 2,400 kilometers from here in Ukraine. For many leaders, for many politicians, this war constitutes an existential threat for Europe. Similarly, ladies and gentlemen, for 3 decades now, Rwanda has faced an existential threat on its border with the DRC, and that's 170 kilometers from our capital, a distance, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, equivalent to that between Paris and Reims. In view of this threat, Rwanda has had to adopt defense measures in good conscience and in a responsible manner to protect its sovereignty and its territorial integrity. But What is the nature of these threats? You will tell me. You also ask me what this has to do with the conflict in the east of the DRC. Allow me to put it in context, which is very important for us. The threat appeared following the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi in 1994. Each of us remembers the horror of 100 days or more. A million men, women, and children were systematically massacred for the sole and simple reason that they were born Tutsi. Rwanda thus sank into horror, abandoned by an international community that had seen the warning signs of the genocide but chose to look the other way. And it is by taking advantage of this apathy and sometimes even this complicity that the perpetrators of these massacres have been able to flee and find refuge in the eastern part of the DRC. Yes, it has been more than 30 years since these militias responsible for the last genocide of the 20th century regrouped, reorganized, and rearmed themselves to finish the job. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, to return and exterminate the whole population, despite being classified as a terrorist organization recognized by the United States and the United Nations, and despite the sanctions imposed by the European Union. The FDLR continues to enjoy total impunity, protected by the government and successive Congolese governments. I am telling you this, ladies and gentlemen, and I will repeat it because these are facts. The FDLR is today a strategic ally of Kinshasa in coalition with the Congolese armed forces. It goes without saying that the FDLR/FRDC represents a security threat for Rwanda, not only encouraged by the DRC, but also tolerated by the international community and MONUSCO, which is supposed to have been disarming them for 25 years to the atrocities that this group commits in the eastern DRC. And on several occasions, there have been murderous incursions into Rwandan territory in flagrant violation of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. The circumstances do not lend themselves to a detailed account of these tragedies. But allow me to mention a few to illustrate the scale of this phenomenon, with, of course, our thoughts with the victims and their loved ones. On the 18th of March 1997, the FDLR stormed a school in Yang in northern Rwanda, the culmination of the split between Hutu and Tutsi. The pupils refused, and the vast majority were executed by gunshots and grenades less than a year later, on 19 January 1998 in Roboavu. 35 employees of a brewery are shot dead in cold blood on their bus. On 23rd December 1999, again in Lubavu, close to around 50 civilians, including women and children, are killed at point-blank range. Some burn them alive. We have projected images that allow you to look at any time at the elements that I am describing in my opening remarks on more recent cases in October 2019. 9. The same group strikes at Kinigi, an iconic tourist site near Virunga Park, home to the mythical gorillas, result 14 deaths than civilians in June 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, the attack launched by the FDLR-FRDC rained down on the Rwandan districts of Musanze and Bua in the midst of preparations for the Commonwealth Summit, most recently on 26 January 2025. In a headlong rush after the capture of Goma by the M23, the FDLR-FRDC Pyongyang blindly the border town of Rubavu, hitting 216 homes, killing 16 civilians, and injuring 177 others. In almost 30 years, the barbarism has remained the same: systematic, targeted, and deeply anti-civil. Since the Battle of Goma that I have just mentioned, it has been proven, ladies and gentlemen, the elected representatives, that a large-scale attack on Rwandan soil was in preparation, an attack led by the FDLR, FRDC, the Wasasalendo militias, the Burundian Armed Forces, the Regional Samia Force, DRC, as well as European mercenaries, mainly from Romania, some of whom had served in the French Foreign Legion, significant arms stocks, ammunition stocks, heavy artillery mortars, long-range missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, aircraft, and kamikaze drones were found less than 5 kilometers from our border. These weapons were not aimed at the theater of operations against the M23, but at Rwandan civilian positions. I repeat, ladies and gentlemen, these weapons were indeed aimed at Rwandan children, women, and men. It is therefore by virtue of this existential threat, which has persisted for more than 30 years, that the Rwandan government has put in place defense measures to prevent the conflict from spilling over into our territory, and above all, to protect the Rwandan population. Mr. President, honorable members of parliament, today, if the LDLR-FRDC coalition constitutes a threat to Rwanda, the infernal mechanics of genocide have been at work in the DRC for centuries. The Congolese Rwandophone populations have been present in the Kivu region long before the redrawing of the borders inherited from the Berlin Conference of 1885. In the aftermath of independence, these populations were persecuted there because of their identity on the arrival of the genociders. A large number of were murdered, women were raped, and an entire people were forced into exile without any opposition from the government in Kinshasa. Rwanda is currently home to more than 100,000 Congolese refugees who are victims of these atrocities, while Uganda is home to more than 400,000 of these people. It is these people that the M23 is defending. The M23, let me remind you, is a Congolese movement fighting for the rights of the Congolese people. Honorable members, on Tuesday, the 11th of March, 2025, some MPs from parties represented here were rightly scandalized by remarks made on issues related to the control of facial expressions, which were deemed unacceptable, unbearable, racist, and even discriminatory. Imagine for a moment, imagine now a country, the DRC, or the simple fact of having a certain facial to be assimilated to a Rwandan, to a Tutsi, constitutes a death sentence. The summary execution of any person perceived as Rwandan has become the norm. Even worse, these acts of barbarism have been exhibited without shame on social networks. Calls for have been launched and encouraged up to the highest level of the state, paving the way for all kinds of excess, including, forgive me for saying so, acts of cannibalism against their fellow Rwandophones. Ladies and gentlemen, the Deputy Justin Bitakwira, a former minister and influential figure close to President Tshisekedi, declared in July 2023 that every Tutsi is a born criminal. Every Tutsi is a born criminal, having the same creator as the devil. The current Minister of Justice, Constance Mutamba, has repeatedly called for the hunt of the Rwandophone populations, even promising to free the prisoners who would devote themselves to this task. The Minister of State and spokesman of the Congolese government, Patrick Muyaya, recently coined the expression Rwandan poison, an infamy that he repeated unashamedly in his interviews on the French channels TV5 and France 24. This vocabulary is now regularly used by the DRC authorities, perfectly illustrating the rise of hate speech and stigmatization of the Rwandan people. This reflects a deliberate propaganda strategy aimed at fueling a climate of mistrust and animosity within the Congolese public, African and international opinion. I will leave you to imagine the consequences that this could have in the long term. Honorable members, this hatred is aggravated by the poor governance, widespread corruption, and opaque and predatory management of the DRC's resources. While the tension is diverted towards the conflict in the east, while real plundering of Congolese wealth continues elsewhere in Out Katanga in the Lualaba, where cobalt and copper mines are exploited for the benefit of foreign interests and a small circle of leaders at the top of the state. let's take a step back, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not be content with a simplistic and erroneous narrative that reduces the current conflict to the mining presence in the east of the DRC. The root causes in the region are known. They are historical and political. Rwanda and the DRC are located in the same mineral-rich geological zone called the Kibaran Belt. To believe that this geological wealth stops at the colonial borders is absurd. Rwanda is rich in natural resources, including gold, wolfram, and other strategic minerals necessary for the energy transition and the sovereignty of Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda is in favor of a lasting solution to the conflict through politics and dialogue. It is in this context that we have always supported the peace processes undertaken since the re-emergence of this conflict in October 2021. Today, African mediation, embodied by the joint process of the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community. Southern Africa Development Community presents a credible voice for lasting peace in the region. Rwanda welcomes the recent progress made in this process, and we call on France and the European Union through its representatives to support these African solutions to African problems, both in form and substance. The unjust call by some for sanctions against Rwanda undermines its efforts and pushes Kinshasa further down the military path, but above all does not provide a solution to the root causes of this conflict. Do not ask us to choose between sanctions and the defense of our territory, because we will always choose to protect our nation. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members of parliament, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that a lasting political solution with long-term security guarantees for Rwanda will enable us to devote ourselves once again to the serious and urgent task of developing our country and the economic integration of our region. For 3 decades, Rwanda has been striving to build a united, stable, and reconciled country. The conflict helps anyone or benefits anyone. For more than 6 months, multiple peace initiatives have been carried out, and Rwanda has always done everything in its power to ensure their success on its side. The Kinshasa regime, on the other hand, has done everything in its power to sabotage them, despite the progress made at the Dar es Salaam summit, despite the meeting of heads of state in Doha, and the new joint process of the East African Community and Southern Africa no later than Monday evening. Ladies and gentlemen, no later than Monday evening. President Tshisekedi was still making inflammatory remarks about Rwanda. I repeat, Rwanda has always wanted a lasting political and security settlement for the region. In this respect, Rwanda is determined to work with all parties to fulfill the commitments made, in particular within the joint process of the East African Community and Southern Africa, as well as other initiatives. However, ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda's security is non-negotiable, and for this reason, our defense measures will remain at its borders until this existential threat is lifted. Rwanda wants peace. Rwandans want to live in peace. I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for explaining the logic behind Rwanda's position, in particular by going back to the ambassador to explain the logic behind Rwanda's position, going back to the origin of the conflict, the need, of course, to protect your state. The questions I have asked you, I think, will be echoed by the speakers now. I'm not going to repeat them so as not to prolong your intervention, but I still have them in mind. And so the discussion will now begin with the political groups of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And the first speaker is Laurent Mauri, and he represents the group Liberté Indépendante, Outre-mer et Territoire. And I will then give the floor to Mr. John Paul Lek and Mr. Guillaume Bigot in that order. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ambassador, the committee is following the evolution of the security situation in the Great Lakes region, particularly in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in recent weeks, the resumption of clashes around Goma and Bukavu has caused a serious deterioration of the humanitarian situation, with hundreds of thousands of displaced persons and many civilian casualties. In this context, the accusations of direct involvement of Rwanda alongside the M23 are growing stronger. Several independent reports, notably those of the group of United Nations experts, report the presence of several thousand Rwandan soldiers operating in the DRC in support of M23 forces. These elements were also included in Security Council Resolution 2773 adopted last February, which explicitly calls for the unconditional withdrawal of Rwandan troops from Congolese territory. In addition, several of Rwanda's international partners, including Germany and Canada, have recently decided to suspend their bilateral aid in view of this situation and the responsibility attributed to your government. In this context, we would like to hear from you in a clear and precise manner. How can Rwanda continue to deny any involvement when the documented facts and international positions converge towards a direct responsibility of your country in the destabilization of the east of the DRC? Moreover, how can it support IR? And it is above all these points. The M23 accused of major crimes and in particular of executing children and committing numerous rapes. Do you think it is possible, Mr. Ambassador, that your country could therefore stop supporting the M23 and thus demonstrate the desire for peace that you have just affirmed before us and in which we believe? I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy, Mr. Ambassador. If you would be so kind as to answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy, for this question. And I intend to provide all possible clarification on this point. First question, regarding the involvement of Rwanda, we have through the voice of my Minister of Foreign Affairs and all the political authorities of Rwanda refute, and I want to reaffirm it here. Please refute the presence of Rwandan troops on Congolese soil. We do not have Rwandan troops on Congolese soil. However, and as I said in my speech, we have taken defensive measures at our borders for the following reason when you have on the other side 22,000 men of the Congolese force, 18,000 Walen force militiamen, 12,000 men of the Burundian force, 4,000 men of the Samir RDC force, 4,000 men of the MONUSCO force, all of whom are converging or proposing evidence that they are there to attack Rwanda. We are taking measures at our border to ensure that there are no incursions, despite the fact that there have been attempts which have not encroached on our territory. The second question relating to support for the M23, Mr. Deputy, we do not support the M23. Of course, we understand their struggle because, as I explained in my opening remarks, this is a force that defends Rwandophone populations in the Kivu region on their land. And when resolutions or experts ask them to withdraw, they respond by saying they will withdraw to go where they are at home. They are Congolese, Rwandan-speaking Congolese, but they are Congolese, the Congolese. Some of them took up arms to take theirs. I told you earlier that we have more than 100,000 Congolese refugees in Rwanda and more than 400,000 in Burundi. On your last question, is it possible to stop the involvement of the M23? That's right. Listen to the M23 support. I think I had already answered about the M23 support, and I will stop on that point. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now give the floor to the Democratic and Republican left, to Mr. Jean-Paul Lecointre. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ambassador, when I listened to you from the beginning of your remarks about the path that connects me to the National Assembly, I had the impression that I already heard this speech. It's often a speech used to justify the unjustifiable, the fact of saying we defend ourselves, we attack, but it's to defend ourselves. It's to defend our people. We are in a context where, for example, Putin in Ukraine, I believe the subject is being addressed this morning, says, I defended the Russian-speaking populations of Donbass we have the same expression from Mr. Netanyahu, who defends Israel, and that is why he is invading Palestine and so on. We now have the king of Morocco, who says the Western Sahara is mine, and so I intervene. It is to defend and so on. And moreover, I will need additional land, which is in Algeria, in Mauritania, as far as the Niger River, and you have the same expressions. I have simple questions because there is a debate, so I don't know who is right, who is wrong. International justice is there for that. I don't have the capacity to investigation. What I do know is that my political party, the Communist Party, took a stand and defended the Rwandan people when the genocide was taking place, and took a stand and reacted at that time. What I do know is that raw materials are currently being extracted from the Congo and sold on the international level by, who is it, Rwanda, that sells its raw materials in the name of what? Finally, there you are. There are some issues there. The M23 is armed. It is heavily armed with, where do the weapons come from? Is it my country, France, that sells weapons to the M23? I know that my country sells weapons to Rwanda. Were these weapons stolen by the M23 from the Rwandan barracks? And so I haven't interrupted you, Mr. Bavio. I wasn't there when you were talking, but I haven't interrupted you at all time. And so is that it. And then how on an international scale, many observers up to the UN says there is an issue. Rwanda is in the process of flouting international law, does not respect the rules of the people. You come and explain to us that there is no issue. I wonder if you are right against the international community. Does the international community have something against Rwanda that makes all against one? I would also have liked you to clarify things in this area. Thank you very much, Mr. Lecoq. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much, Mr. Lecoq. I want to start with your last point. The international community has something against Rwanda. I don't know. I'm wondering if you remember that in 1994, the international community did nothing. It observed. It watched while a genocide of 1 million people because everything was being carried out. So we learned our lesson. And 80 years already, the Holocaust at the time we had said, never again. 94, just before it happened, we said never again, but it happened. We learned our lesson. We said, whatever happens, we will use all the means, however modest, in our possession, so that it never happens again in Rwanda or in our region, because all the warning signs in the east of the DRC, given the hate speech, the discriminatory remarks, the hunting of everything are happening. You have seen the hate speech. You have seen what we have. We have shown you an image of what the current government spokesman, speaking of poison, Randan, the Minister of Justice, who speaks of hunting all on the walkie-talkie, and you say there is no sign. I don't know your question about weapons. We do not sell weapons to the M23, and we do not receive weapons. France does not sell arms to Rwanda. I wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much, Monsieur. If there is a question, there was another question about the question of sales of minerals or raw materials, and then about the sale of arms. The question was not exactly that. It was, where do the arms come from? Do you have any information about where they come from and how the M23 can equip itself? There is that question there, where the weapons come from. Yes, thank you for this question. But now I'm going to ask you to contact the M23 representatives. And I suppose they will be able to tell you where the weapons come from. I am not their spokesperson, and I cannot answer this question. And the first question was about raw materials. Maybe we will come back to this with more precision, as I did in my preliminary remarks. Rwanda has very important mining resources of gold, coltan, WFM, tungsten, sitarite, and many others. I invite you, honorable member, to come to Rwanda to visit these mines, to visit the 90 or so companies that are located in our territory. And you know, we have taken transparency and traceability I am sure you are aware that following the request of the European Union, ladies and gentlemen, a memorandum was signed on traceability and transparency in the mining sector with Rwanda in June 2024. So there is transparency and traceability, unlike what is happening in the DRC. Thank you, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the national representative, Mr. Guillaume Bigot. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, dear colleagues, Mr. Ambassador, I could have asked you about the 120 tons of coltan extracted every month from the Congolese mine in Rubaya that ends up on your soil, exported for the benefit of Rwanda. But I would prefer to ask you to kindly enlighten us on the protocol agreement signed by your government with the European Union concerning sustainable and resilient value chains, that these things are well said for critical raw materials. Could you in particular enlighten us on the roadmap between the European Union and Rwanda on the exploitation of RAR land? Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. Honorable Member. I believe that I had partly answered when I was talking about the mining sector. If we can maybe put the slide on the projection on the various export revenues, it will give you an idea of the Rwandan mining sector. Yes, I will answer, because since you are talking about Rubaya, I might as well tell you that we have coltan in Rwanda. We don't take coltan from Rubaya. And there again, there is a little confusion, which is once again made about the exploitation of the coltan in Rubaya is carried out on a small scale, as I read in the press, and it benefits the local population. But this exploitation, this export must not be confused. I have seen expert reports that talk about $320,000, and that is not what will come to Rwanda. That is certainly, in the case of Rwanda, we have coltan which is being exploited and exported to Europe. The roadmap, I could share the documents with you later if you like, in relation to the memorandum of understanding signed with the European Union. But once again, I must insist on this principle of, on the one hand, we have transparency, ladies and gentlemen, and traceability in the mining sector. I think that's something that should be not only encouraged by the members of parliament who are there, and many others by companies who are now reassured that Rwanda has transparency. And this transparency allows even more companies to come to the sector in Rwanda rather than go to the sub-region. Thank you, Mr. Bigot. Yes, well, the coltan mine in your territory or in your neighbor's territory is a bit like the oil mine here or there. It's impossible to know. It's a coltan. It doesn't have the words Mdin Rwanda or Medin Democratic Republic of Congo on it. You see, that's the problem. And in this case, it's 120 tons. It goes through fine on the other side. I'm sorry, Mr. Deputy, that ton is not going through on the Rwanda side, and I would have understood if Rwanda didn't have a cold temp, but Rwanda does have a cold temp. And once again, as I suggested to your colleague, I invite you. You're not traveling together, agreed. I invite you to come. You have the microphone alone for the moment. I could hear someone speaking to me. Yes, but you have the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Deputy, Mr. Bigot. Last but not least, first of all, I travel with everyone, but above all, the subject is, could you enlighten us on these protocol agreements with the European Union and the roadmap? In other words, what is planned with the European Union concerning these value chains? Thank you. I pressed the wrong button. Sorry, the roadmap is precise. As I told you earlier, it is a document that we can share with you at the end of this session. And once again, it is a document that focuses on the transparency and traceability of minerals that come from, I should clarify, ladies and gentlemen, from Rwanda. Thank you. I give the floor to Mr. Hervé Berviou for Ensemble pour la République, followed by Mr. Orient Taché and Mr. Alain David. Get ready. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your presence. As you said, as it has been said by the governor of the southern province of Kivu, for more than 40 years, the Great Lakes region has been plagued by recurrent conflicts with, of course, the populations being the first victims for more than 40 years. The question of both mineral resources, but also the political question, has been at the heart of the various conflicts between the countries of the sub-region. So Mr. Ambassador, I had three fairly simple questions. The first is, what is the nature of the relationship between Rwanda and the M23, whether financial or in terms of weapons, as has been mentioned? The second is, can you tell us, and do you know how many Rwandophone people are in the east of the Congo? And can we say roughly how many genocidaires or two who have taken refuge in this region? And the last question, what do you intend to do in the coming months to ensure that peace is found in this region? And what humanitarian measures in particular can you take to ensure that the exactions, the massacres, the atrocities stop in this region? And Mr. President, if you will allow me, we are a few days away from the commemoration of the genocide of the two. And I say this because I have just had a conversation that I want to be included in the minutes of our proceedings. No, I had a colleague who has just said it's crazy. I quote that all peoples who are victims of genocide go from attack to aggressor. Mrs. Clementinetin and Madam Minister Domanais has just said, no, I will continue because I have unfortunately heard. I am saying this because it is, I said it and you indicated, Madam Minister, they have a victimizing position to say that in the presence of an ambassador, saying that at the time when we are commemorating the genocide of the concerns, I find it indecent. And I understand, no, I'm finishing, no, but I'm waiting. You have the right to finish, and I'm finishing. And I understand why. For decades, the French political class has been incapable of establishing the truth about this role in the genocide and so on and so forth. Madam Tin, but in a short format, that's it, and so that we can continue the hearing. But obviously, you have many different elements. I think you can see the distance. There are award-winning conversations and political positions. So you're not my spokesperson, so you don't have to argue. No, you heard what we said first. Secondly, no lessons to be learned about Rwanda. My first written question as a parliamentarian was on this question of Rwanda, for France to shed full light on our state's responsibilities in the Rwandan genocide. So be careful what you are saying. Be careful what you are saying. This is not a conversation. This is not a conversation. Mrs. Otin, don't talk nonsense, sir. But ENF, it's senseless. I don't want there to be a conversation. So please speak. Finish what you have to say, Mr. Bavu. We're listening, madam. I think that Mr. Bavu's attitude of Mr. Baville is a real problem for our commission. This is not the first time he has acted in this way. And I think this aggressiveness must be stopped. Speaking when I am talking and reporting conversations he has not heard are not the way to do things. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You have the floor to respond to Mr. Bavu. Please go ahead to add to what I think to express my position. So I say to him about the genocide and this, yes, please be clear about being just as clear-sighted about what is happening today and Rwanda's responsibilities. When we are fair, we are on principles and at all levels, all the time. That's it. That's my position and that's our position. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You have the floor, Mr. President, honorable members. If I may, I'll just start by commenting a little on the don't you get involved too, Mr. Ambassador. No, but it's a clarification. Please go ahead. I'll try to put the right emphasis. Just a clarification. We are talking about the genocide of the Tutsi. Please, we are talking about the genocide of the Tutsi, not the genocide of Rwanda and this position of victimization. It's true that it is, I can't find the words, we are shocked, we are outraged that such remarks should be made. So, Mr. Ambassador, it does not appear, Mr. Ambassador, it does not appear. No one has spoken to say that. Mr. Ambassador, answer Mr. Baville's question. No one has spoken to raise this point and this position. So I can continue, Madam Deputy. Mr. Ambassador has the floor, unless there was no microphone, perhaps, but I heard what was said. That's why I commented, and I'll stop there. Very well. We will surely come back to questions related to this again. To that, I will stick to the answer. But the question, Mr. Ambassador, answer Mr. Baville, who asked the question. You are not listening to what is being said. Furthermore, Mr. President, I am going to answer 3 questions to Mr. Baville, the Member of Parliament. The first is related to the notion of the link between Rwanda and the M23. I believe that I have been precise throughout moment. We do not have, Rwanda has no connection with the M23, unfortunately, and it is not necessarily Mr. Baville, but there is this somewhat simplistic narrative where one thinks that because the people of the M23 speak a language which is kin Rwanda, one thinks that they are Rwandan. They are, I specify, Congolese, and they also claim to be Congolese. It will not occur to you to mind, I think, here of saying that a Strasbourg resident who speaks German is German. The same thing applies. The fact that they speak Kin Rwanda does not mean that they are Rwandophone populations, does not prevent them from being Congolese. Therefore, we have no financial link of support in armament with the M23. Second question, Rwandophone population at the east, it was the humanitarian measures. We offered our support just in case, and look carefully there at the capture of Goma on the 26th. And in the days that followed, we received as well the official authorities of the MONUSCO forces. More than 300 European mercenaries entered. Rwanda were received. Congolese soldiers, FRDC who are fleeing the combat were received. Congolese populations, Olisi, were received and treated in a way that was a dignified descent into our territory. We are still inviting all populations who feel in danger to the entered Rwanda to come back, if necessary. The rest were comments that we will avoid coming back to. Yes, I think I have answered the question very well. Thank you for your answer. The floor now goes to France, Insoumise, to Mr. Orientache. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. On 7th April, it will indeed be. That was recalled the International Day dedicated to the genocide of the Tears in Rwanda. A concert was planned in France on that date. The Congo Solidarity concert, you asked for it to be postponed, Mr. Ambassador, and you were right. Nothing should be allowed to hinder the duty of remembrance of the genocide and the horror that you rightly recalled, but nothing should be allowed to impede the duty of solidarity with the Congolese people who are today the victims of a war of aggression being waged in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. After the temporary defeat of the M23 in 2013, 11 countries in the Great Lakes region, including Rwanda, have agreed to end the deadliest conflict since the Second World War and guarantee peace in the Congo. This Addis Ababa Protocol required its states to respect all sovereignties and prohibited any form of internal interference in neighboring countries. So, Mr. Ambassador, I understood you to say that you did not, that your country had no direct link with the LAM-23. All the documents of the UN and international bodies say the exact opposite. Everything shows that today your country is the main financier of this movement and that your army is even present. Despite your denials this morning on Congolese soil, you tell us that it is there to ultimately ensure the security of the Rwandan state and to protect the Tutsi community who are still being persecuted. And if this is true, it is obviously totally unacceptable and must be stopped immediately. But what proof can you give us of the effectiveness of a single act that has recently jeopardized Rwanda's security and been committed from Congolese territory, or of this persecution? Because everything suggests the opposite, that the primary objective of the M23 and the Rwandan army is to capture the region's numerous minerals. However, all of this is perfectly documented. The NGO Global Witness estimates, for example, that 90% of the volume of cobalt exported by Rwanda is illegally brought into the country from the Congo. No terrorist group action is effectively tolerable, but no terrorist group action can justify either the massacre of the civilian population or the desire to annex a country. So, Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to ask you a simple question. Do you intend to apply Security Council Resolution 2773, which calls for the immediate withdrawal of Rwandan troops, or does your government not intend to do so? Ambassador, I'm going to ask you a simple question. Do you intend to apply Security Council Resolution 2773, which calls for the immediate withdrawal of Rwandan troops from Congolese territory and an end to all support for the M23? Does your government intend to apply this resolution? And since you have spoken of a political solution, will the political solution you have in mind guarantee the territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Ambassador, I will give you the floor in a few seconds. You may take it whenever you wish. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. I believe I have said everything I had to say. I risk repeating myself. The reports of the experts, the reports of the United Nations experts, we refute, and I stated here the reports of the United Nations. I am sorry, they are not the Bible, the reports of these experts. And once again, there has been no other evidence except reports. They did not come to deter. They did not come to the field. They were in Kinshasa and made reports. They returned to New York and wrote reports that we refute. Once again, we do not have troops on Congolese soil. The fact that the M23 has expanded, go ask the M23 if the Congolese army is in disarray. This is an internal problem between the M23 and the Congolese army. We have no troops on Congolese territory. So the resolution you mentioned is not applicable to Rwanda, the withdrawal of Rwandan troops from Congo. There are no Rwandan troops in Congo. However, there is something important that we want to emphasize in relation to political dialogue. And the following thing, we had first a Luanda process and then a Nairobi process, or the two which were recently combined at the summit of heads of state, which took place on 8th February in Dar es Salaam. This was followed by meetings of the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, also in Dar es Salaam, followed by meetings of the foreign ministers in Alale. And there I am talking about the merger of the two processes, what happened afterwards. Each time, look, it's public, it's on the news. Honorable members, each time the DRC has cancelled or has not respected its agreements, has not respected the conditions that are in the agreements. Last element, it was Doha. Now, the two heads of state travel to DOA, meet, sign joint agreements, a press release calling for a ceasefire, calling for dialogue between the M23 and the Congolese authorities. I believe this was the first time that he agreed to dialogue the day after the meeting. President Chekedi gave an interview in Le Figaro. Go and look at the article where he talks about Pentin when talking about the M23, where he comes back to resolution 2773. So what do you want? We have a leadership here that is going from one agreement and its opposite. I'm not going to go back over all the agreements, more specifically the agreements signed between Bujumbura, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and Luanda, which have never been respected by the Congolese side. Political will, I think you should contact Kinshasa. If there is the political will, things will be resolved. We have always made it clear that we want political dialogue. We want peace in our region. No one has any interest in prolonging the conflict. I would like to thank you. I forgot to clarify. You mentioned the recent attacks. I believe that they have removed this slide. You have between 97 and 2025. There have been more than 30 attacks between 2018 and 2018 and 2025. We have counted more than 20 attacks and incursions in Rwanda, honorable member. And each time we have informed the competent authorities, the United Nations, the IGLR structure. It is an English language organization. I want to come back to the term if necessary. Each time we inform the competent authorities what happened in the community. You took notes, you all took notes, but nothing was done. I'm just clarifying that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor goes to Mr. Alain David of the Socialists and Allies Group. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ambassador of Rwanda, La France, supported Resolution 2773 of 21st February, which reaffirms the international community's commitment to the territorial integrity of the DRC, its condemnation of the offensives of the M23, supported by the Rwandan Defense Force, and its absolute disapproval of the violations of humanitarian law and human rights abuses of, moreover, suspicions of a conflict being exploited in order to plunder the natural resources of the North and South Kivu provinces, recently led the European Parliament to adopt a resolution calling on the European Union to suspend the agreement on rare minerals signed in 2024 with your country. It is regrettable that the mediations of Angola and Kenya is not enough to diffuse the situation, and hope that the mediation of Qatar, which began on 18 March in DUA, will put the region on the path to peace. Can you, Mr. Ambassador, clarify the sticking points that caused the failure of previous mediations and present the demands made by the Rwandan side as part of the so-called merged process of the Organization of Eastern African States and the Organization of Southern African States? Thank you, Honorable Member. Specific question, Honorable Ambassador. Thank you very much. Go ahead. Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Yes, as you say, Mr. President, specific question, specific answer, the blocking factors. If I can summarize them in a single word or words, to be precise, the political will of Kinshasa to implement the conditions that are signed at each summit, at each meeting, as long as, and this is public, Honorable Member, as long as we go to a summit, we agree on specific points, on conditions, ceasefire, neutralization of the FDLR, direct dialogue with the M23. As long as we agree, we sign the agreements and we go back to Kinshasa and we change completely there. We can't do anything about it. For the past few weeks, we have heard the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kinshasa talk about, I think it is time to start the dialogue, but you have seen that this new message, this about done, comes from the fact that unfortunately the M23 is taking more territories, and that I think Kinshasa feels cornered and is now deciding to engage in dialogue. It is a good thing. It is important to continue the dialogue. But for us, there is only dialogue is not enough. Rwanda must guarantee our security. Mr. Deputy, the FDLR/FRDC must be neutralized on the Rwandan side. That is my answer on this point. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Green and Social Group, Mr. Jean-Louis Rumeyas. And then to conclude this first round, we have Mrs. M. Petit for the Democrats. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ambassador, it can be said that the situation in the northern and southern Out Kivu is extremely worrying. According to UN observers, the M23 group's lightning offensive was aided by 400 ambassadors. It can be said that the situation in the northern and southern Kivu is extremely worrying. According to UN observers, the lightning offensive of the M23 group, which is fighting against the Congolese state and has been reinforced by 4,000 Rwandan soldiers, is intensifying the chaos that has reigned in the region for more than 30 years. According to UN figures, in the space of just 3 months, hundreds of thousands of Congolese have been forced to flee. More than 100,000 have sought refuge in neighboring countries. Hundreds of summary executions have taken place in the towns held by the M23, while sexual violence has increased. All this has been brought up. The tense security situation and the closure of Goma Airport is preventing humanitarian workers from responding to the needs of the population behind these human dramas. We see a very clear motivation for the M23 to seize the mining resources. The Rwanda denies any involvement in the trade in these minerals of blood. But the UN report, once again, attests to the contrary. It appears that a smuggling route has been used to mine more than 120 tons of coltan every month from the Rubaya mine, which has fallen into the hands of the M23 since May 2024 towards the Rwandan border. The figures speak for themselves. Your country's mineral exports have doubled in 3 years, rising from 1,046 to 2,070 tons in 2 years, while mining sector revenues have increased by 42, even though Rwanda has its own mines, such as the Dumak mine, and gives journalists tours of them. International experts are adamant that Rwanda's mineral resources are not enough to explain the explosion in exports. These exports, which are made possible by the EU's association agreement with Rwanda, are largely destined for Europe. More recently, after the adoption of sanctions by the EU against Rwandan officials, your country has decided to suspend all relations with Belgium, considered the main instigator of these sanctions. All Belgian aid to Rwandan and international NGOs is now prohibited. Once again, it is the civilians who will suffer the consequences of this crisis, which is added to the crisis. So, Mr. Ambassador, how does the suspension of cooperation with Belgium, in particular the ban on its aid to NGOs, really serves the interests of the Rwandan people when this aid largely benefited the most vulnerable populations? Thank you. This is an aspect that we have not yet seen in this question on humanitarian aid, and which is an absolutely central issue if we take into account the populations and the state in which these populations currently live. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Two clarifications. And I think I will start with the mining sector, on which you have placed great emphasis. You know, Mr. Deputy, Rwanda put in place 7 years ago an ambitious strategy. I will go into a little detail to explain why there is such growth in income and in the exploitation of our minerals. Rwanda has put in place an ambitious strategy aimed at increasing the added value, ladies and gentlemen, of the minerals and other raw materials that we have in Rwanda. This initiative is, of course, part of our long-term vision for the economic transformation of Rwanda. And one of the key objectives of this strategy is to position Rwanda and our capital, in particular, as the essential hub for the exchange of raw materials and of financial services. By integrating modern infrastructure and putting in place an attractive regulatory framework, Rwanda aspires to become a leading platform for the processing and marketing of the natural resources found on its territory. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, it is already attracting many investors in this sector today. Many investors in this sector, and as part of this policy, from 2018, a smelting plant has been put into service to process and purify the ore extracted from Rwanda in 2019. A gold refinery, the first on the African continent, was inaugurated, offering the possibility, Honorable Member of Parliament, to transform the raw gold into high-purity lingo. And more recently, in 2024, a tantalum refinery began operations, thus strengthening Rwanda's capacity to process locally the strategic minerals used in advanced technologies, among other things. You know, the strategy of added value for Rwanda has been applied as Belgium or Switzerland have been doing for years towards it is the export platform for diamonds and gold. But I don't think there is a single gold mine in either of these nations, Mr. P. Although they do not possess their own resources, they have been able to develop an efficient ecosystem. I am talking about Switzerland and Belgium. An efficient ecosystem that allows them to capture this significant added value by transforming raw minerals into finished products. And that is what we in Rwanda are trying to do. Your second question on the closure of Goma Airport, Mr. Deputy, is related to Goma Airport. You made a comment about the ORT in Goma. I will come back to that. And then on Humanitarian, Goma Airport, it has been closed there again. It is fighting. It has not been closed. If you take pictures, I think that of Goma Airport, it is impassable. The control tower was destroyed by the Congolese Armed Forces and FDLR just before the arrival of the M23. The runway is now impassable. If now you follow the news, you will have seen that a few days ago, the South African force came to an agreement with the M23. They signed an MOU to jointly demine the runway and the taxiway so that tomorrow every aircraft can land on the runway of the Goma airport and for this airport to be reopened. And of course, to allow humanitarian aeroplanes to land again on Goma relations with Belgium. Yes, we have broken off our relations with Belgium for the following simple reason. Yeah, it's a country that knows our history very well, with whom we have a very close history, that has decided to lobby all the European capitals at the level of the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, so that sanctions, economic sanctions, ladies, this was unacceptable to us. Unacceptable. What is the point of having a relationship with a country that advocates sanctions against itself, economic sanctions? We accept this decision. And of course, even the NGOs will have other resources. We don't need Belgian resources for the Rwandan people to be served. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Perhaps to extend the question, if you will allow me, we have understood your position on minerals, on the exploitation of minerals. We are, of course, aware of the economic development of Rwanda, the attractiveness you pointed out of processing platforms, on the status on gold, on tantalum soon. But is it conceivable Monson Monyo, the ambassador, and that private operators cross the border today from mines located in Eastern Congo and go to Rwanda precisely to take advantage of these facilities or of the exports? Is it that this trafficking is possible and would pass under the radar of official visibility? Thank you very much, Mr. President. Private operators come to Rwanda, and here I will give a few examples. South African operators bring their gold to Rwanda raw for processing into lingo. They do not necessarily resell it on European markets. Sorry to disappoint some people, but they resell it on the Dubai markets. The operators of West Africa remains to be seen. I had my predecessor talking earlier about some Congolese operators who come through, who give them their gold, which is processed, and then leave with it. I heard that earlier, who live with it and go to sell it in Dubai. So there again, I can also give examples among European operators. We have many European operators who come to Rwanda, they make transactions and re-export these raw materials, which are valued in Europe, traceability, and of course there is traceability thanks to this MOU that was signed with Rwanda. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. A brief word for the Democrats group. Thank you, Mr. President, Your Excellency. I thank you for giving us this opportunity for dialogue, even if I perhaps had the feeling this morning that we came with our questions and you came with your answers. The conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, particularly in the east of the country, is a human tragedy and a security issue that deserves our full attention. The persistent tensions fueled by the activities of the M23 rebel group are having serious repercussions on regional stability and on the civilian population. As you will agree, the Congolese government and the M23 rebels have agreed to meet for direct negotiations on the 9th of April in DOA, Qatar. This will be the first direct meeting since the M23 took control of Goma, and at the beginning of the year, the situation remains unstable, but this meeting brings hope because the sporadic clashes, massive population displacements, and an aggravated humanitarian crisis have caused millions of victims, 6 million deaths, 7 million internally displaced persons, 375,000 children exposed to forced recruitment, and it has been the sad toll since 1998 that the conflicts in the Democratic Republic of the Congo have directly or indirectly caused. And these figures are not set to increase. Since 2021, the clashes have resumed with greater force, particularly in North Kivu and South Kivu in the regions bordering Rwanda. The fighting pits the forces of the Congolese army with that of the M23 rebel group opposed to the Congolese government created in 2012 by former members of the armed forces, mainly composed of fighters from the ethnic minority. The Tutsi rebels claim to be defending the rights of this community in a region marked by ethnic tensions, despite the denials from Kigali, and you repeated them again this morning. It is clearly demonstrated that the M23 benefits from the support of Rwanda UN